got my Kimmy cat. Meow. Is it reformatting? Are you recording? My Kimmy cat. My Kimmy cat. Meow. Oh god. Oh god. Okay, I'm gonna put you down. There's kitty litter on my lap. Hey everyone, so as a continuation of my law school admissions process series, I was asked to talk about my GRE prep, and I thought it was a really good deal, so I'm going to do it. So in this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences as a self-studier, if that's a word. It's definitely not a word, and how I got my scores high enough to get into a top-tier law school. She's not coming to me. I took the GRE twice in 2018 after my LSAT scores from 2013 expired. I self-studied for the GRE for a total of 4 to 5 months. That means 4 to 5 months total for both tests. So for example, an average of 2.5 months for the first test and an average of 2.5 months for the second test. As I was studying, I didn't use any test prep materials or anything of the sort. At the time, I was super broke, and this video is for anyone who's studying for the GRE and is super broke like me, or just wants to save a couple $100s. As I mentioned, I studied for about 4 to 5 months total as I was taking the GRE. When I took the test the first time, I started studying in November to take the test in March. And the second time I took the test, I started studying in late June to take the test in late July. So I pretty much have 2 different studying regimens. When I took the GRE for the first time, I scheduled myself to study on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. At the time, I was working 2 jobs, so needless to say, things did not exactly go as planned. As much as I wanted to study, at the end of the day, I was exhausted, and I would oftentimes fall asleep as I would study, or just 86 at all to begin with. As I studied for the first time that I took the GRE, I was also using some hand-me-down Kaplan test prep books that a friend had given me. I remember when she first gave them to me, I went through every page and erased all of the answers that were written into her books. There was also highlighting. The downside of this was it felt like I was reading through each section with the narration of someone else in my head. So I don't recommend using someone else's test prep books. Just bite the bullet and buy your own. Unfortunately, this can make a huge difference because sometimes you can see someone else's answers as you're trying to test yourself, and that can be a little counterproductive. The first time I took the GRE, I probably studied an average of 6 hours a week, which in the long run I actually don't think is enough. I started my test prep by reviewing the different question types in the verbal reasoning and the quantitative reasoning sections. Then I would move on to practicing full-length practice sections for verbal and quantitative reasoning, and on occasion I would also study writing sections with practice essays. So for example, on Monday, that was dedicated to verbal reasoning. On Tuesday, that was dedicated to quantitative reasoning, and on Thursday, that was dedicated to practicing writing. I also reviewed the vocabulary in the verbal section by channeling my inner 3rd grader. So I would write down the definition of a word and write down 2 to 3 practice sentences to familiarize myself with the definition. I also used vocabulary flashcards, which were extremely helpful. So let's move a little bit forward to when I actually took my first test for the GRE. My writing sections and my verbal reasoning sections were actually amazing. I was fine with where my test scores were, but my math was garbage, like total trash. So it was helpful to know what I needed to go back to the drawing board for when I took the test the second time. I also started studying pretty consistently 6 weeks out from my actual test date. For example, I studied for the first 4 weeks with written tests, and for the last 2 weeks, I studied with the electronic computer-based tests so that I could familiarize myself with the structure. Because I did so well on the writing section when I took the test the first time, I didn't focus in as much on this when I took the test for the second time. Instead, I tried to maintain my existing skills for the verbal section, and I tried to improve on my skills from the quantitative reasoning section. I studied for the verbal section for about 2 hours per week alone, and I studied for the quantitative section for about 2.5 to 3 hours per week. Mind you, for the quantitative section, it included a lot of math that I admittedly haven't seen since high school or even my freshman year in college. In that circumstance, YouTube videos and tutorials were pretty much my best friend. I had to relearn a lot of material that was completely new or foreign to me. So a note about the GRE studying process. It's important to note what is realistic and what isn't realistic in terms of what you can improve and can't improve. For example, in terms of how I learned and memorized certain vocabulary in a confined amount of time, I tried to be realistic with myself about what was actually feasible for me as a person with a job and other responsibilities. I also tried to be realistic with myself on the types of equations that it would be realistic for me to learn how to solve in a confined amount of time. You're not going to learn all of it, but what you can do is chip away at the basics and the fundamentals of what are going to make the test easier overall. The second time I took the GRE, I showed significant progress. For example, in verbal reasoning, my score jumped about 30 points, which equated to about 10 percentage points. And in quantitative reasoning, my score jumped about 6 points, which equated to 20 percentage points. And in writing, my score did not improve. However, I was already scoring in a range that I felt comfortable with, so I didn't feel the need to improve this section when I took the test the second time. As a general rule of thumb, I advise you to match your GRE scoring percentiles with the school's corresponding LSAT scoring percentiles. For example, at Georgetown Law, the LSAT median is a 167, which is in the 94th percentile. Accordingly, when I took the GRE, I aimed for scores that would altogether, if combined, be similar to a 94th percentile LSAT, which was around a 164 in verbal reasoning, a 168 in quantitative reasoning, and a 5 in the writing section. At the same time, I do want to remind folks that there is a GRE to LSAT conversion calculator. I'm not sure how much schools actually use this, but in their algorithm, it does seem as though they put a heavier weight on your verbal GRE score than they put on your quantitative reasoning score. This doesn't mean that you can completely bomb the quantitative reasoning section, but what it does mean is that the verbal reasoning seems to be the more important of the two. And since the LSAT seems to be a little more analytical reasoning and logic reasoning and reading focused in general, it does make more sense that they would place more weight on your verbal reasoning score than they would place on your math score. Now, if you want to try to get a rough idea of the number of students who were accepted to a law school but did not take the GRE, you can take a look at a school's 509 disclosure and take a look at their LSAT statistics. There's going to be a number at the bottom that lists the number of students who were not figured into their LSAT average. Those will typically either be students that either didn't take the standardized tests, now I don't know how exactly that would work, or students that took the GRE instead of the LSAT. Since GRE scores are not a required disclosure on 509 reports, those students won't be figured into those statistics. I'd love to see your comments below to help other students who may be studying for the GRE in terms of getting into law schools. What are some resources that you use that you found to be super helpful? And what were some that you found to be super unhelpful? Also, please let me know what you'd like to learn about the law school admissions process next time. And please hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next Thursday.